Tom Hardy just did what millions of Britons have been desperate to do but couldn't. Live on television with cameras rolling and no script to hide behind. One of Britain's most beloved actors looked Keir Starmer directly in the eye and unleashed a verbal assault that has left the entire nation stunned. This wasn't a polite disagreement. This wasn't celebrity virtue signalling. This was raw, unfiltered fury from a man who's had enough of watching his country being destroyed by politicians who lie through their teeth while ordinary people suffer. What Hardy said in those explosive minutes has been scrubbed from some platforms, censored by others. But the truth is spreading like wildfire across Britain. The establishment is in full panic mode, Starmer's team is scrambling for damage control, and the British public is finally hearing someone with a platform say what they've been thinking all along. What you're about to hear will shock you, inspire you, and make you question everything you've been told about who the real extremists are in modern Britain. The confrontation erupted during what was supposed to be a carefully controlled interview segment on a major British network. Tom Hardy had been invited to discuss his latest project, one of those safe celebrity appearances that producers love because they generate publicity without controversy. But something shifted the moment Keir Starmer's name came up. The interviewer, following the standard script, asked Hardy for his thoughts on the current political climate, expecting the usual diplomatic non-answer that celebrities give when they want to avoid alienating half their audience. Instead, Hardy's expression changed, his jaw tightened, and what came out of his mouth in the next few minutes was unlike anything British television has broadcast in years. He didn't hold back, he didn't play it safe, he didn't worry about his career or his reputation. He spoke with the voice of millions who have been silenced, censored, and told their concerns don't matter. The studio went dead silent. Camera operators forgot they were supposed to be getting reaction shots. The interviewer sat frozen, clearly unprepared for what was unfolding. This was real, unscripted, and absolutely devastating. Hardy began by addressing the farmer protests directly, and his words cut through the usual political rhetoric like a knife through butter. He talked about visiting rural communities, about meeting farmers who've worked their entire lives only to face financial ruin because of Starmer's inheritance tax policies. These weren't abstract talking points for him. He named specific people, told their stories, described the desperation in their voices when they explained how generations of family legacy were being destroyed overnight. Hardy's intensity built as he spoke, his famous gravelly voice carrying the weight of genuine emotion rather than performed outrage. He pointed out the obscenity of a government that claims to represent working people while targeting those who actually work the hardest, who feed the nation, who maintain the countryside that defines so much of British identity. The passion was palpable, but so was the precision. This wasn't an emotional rant without substance. Hardy had clearly done his research, understood the policies, grasped the implications. He was speaking with authority born from actually listening to the people being affected rather than just reading government press releases. But Hardy didn't stop with farmers. He pivoted to the broader crackdown on free speech, and this is where the confrontation became truly explosive. He called out Starmer by name, describing him as a man who campaigned on unity and competence, but has governed through division and authoritarianism. Hardy specifically mentioned cases of ordinary citizens being arrested for social media posts, for attending protests, for daring to question government orthodoxy. He used the word tyranny, a term that mainstream media has been careful to avoid, but that perfectly captures what millions are feeling. The interviewer tried to interrupt to steer the conversation back to safer territory, but Hardy wasn't having it. He spoke over the interruption, his voice rising, demanding to know when Britain became a country where police arrest grandmothers for Facebook posts while actual criminals walk free. The frustration, the anger, the sense of betrayal, it all poured out in a torrent that couldn't be stopped or sanitised. This was a man who'd reached his breaking point watching his country slide into something unrecognisable. What made Hardy's verbal assault so powerful was that it articulated what ordinary Britons have been struggling to express. He talked about the gap between what politicians promise and what they deliver, about the arrogance of a ruling class that treats voters with contempt, about the systematic destruction of British values and freedoms under the guise of progress and safety. He pointed out that Starmer's Labour didn't win because people loved their agenda, but because people were exhausted with the Conservatives. They voted for change and instead got more of the same establishment control wrapped in different packaging. Hardy's voice cracked with emotion as he described talking to working class people in his hometown who feel utterly betrayed, who trusted that this government would be different and are now watching their concerns being criminalised. He challenged the narrative that opposition to current policies equals extremism, pointing out that the real extremism is coming from a government that's weaponising state power against its own citizens for the crime of disagreement. The most stunning moment came when Hardy directly challenged Starmer's legitimacy to govern. He pointed out the massive disapproval ratings, the broken campaign promises, the policies that were never mentioned during the election, but are now being forced through regardless of public opinion. Hardy demanded to know who actually voted for farmers to be destroyed, for free speech to be criminalised, for Britain to become a surveillance state where wrong opinions lead to arrest. Nobody voted for this, he declared, his voice filled with righteous anger. This government is governing without consent, implementing an agenda that the British people never endorsed, and using the machinery of state to crush anyone who points this out. It was a fundamental challenge to democratic legitimacy delivered with the force of moral certainty. The interviewer sat speechless, clearly uncertain how to respond to such a direct assault on the political establishment. You could see the panic in the studio, producers likely screaming in earpieces, lawyers probably having heart attacks. But the cameras kept rolling and Hardy kept speaking. What happened next reveals everything about the current state of British media and politics. Within minutes of the interview airing, social media exploded. Clips of Hardy's confrontation spread across every platform, shared by thousands who felt they were finally hearing their own thoughts expressed by someone who couldn't be easily dismissed or silenced. The response from ordinary Britons was overwhelmingly supportive, with the comment sections filled with gratitude that someone with Hardy's profile was willing to speak truth to power. But simultaneously, the machinery of establishment response kicked into gear. Mainstream media outlets began framing the incident as a celebrity meltdown or an unfortunate outburst rather than a legitimate expression of widespread concerns. Political commentators friendly to the government dismissed Hardy as uninformed, as stepping outside his lane, as typical of celebrities who don't understand the complexities of governance. The standard playbook for neutralising dissent was deployed with practised efficiency: attack the messenger, question their motives, suggest they're being manipulated by extremist forces, anything to avoid actually addressing the substance of what was said. The government's response to Hardy's televised destruction of Starmer has been telling in its desperation. Downing Street released a statement within hours, not addressing any of the specific allegations Hardy made, but instead condemning the tone and suggesting that such rhetoric is unhelpful and potentially dangerous. It's the classic authoritarian move of deflecting from content to tone, of suggesting that the real problem isn't the policies destroying people's lives, but the anger of those pointing this out. Labour MPs flooded social media with coordinated talking points, all hitting the same themes about celebrities needing to stay in their lane and the importance of trusting experts over emotion. But this coordinated response only made things worse for the government because it confirmed exactly what Hardy had said about an establishment that circles the wagons whenever challenged. The British public isn't stupid. They can see the difference between genuine concern and political spin. They recognise authentic emotion versus rehearsed talking points. And what they saw in Hardy was authentic, while what they're seeing from the government is desperate damage control. What's particularly fascinating is how this confrontation has shifted the wider conversation about what's happening in Britain. Before Hardy's outburst, mainstream discourse had successfully framed farmer protests and free speech concerns as fringe issues promoted by right-wing agitators. But Hardy isn't easily pigeonholed into those categories. He's a beloved actor with working class roots, someone known for supporting charitable causes and speaking about mental health and vulnerability. He's not a politician or a professional provocateur. He's exactly the kind of person that the establishment has relied on to stay silent or supportive, the kind of celebrity whose political statements usually align with progressive orthodoxy. His willingness to break with that script and directly attack Starmer has created a permission structure for others to speak out. If Tom Hardy can call the Prime Minister a tyrant on live television, if he can articulate the concerns that millions share without being destroyed for it, then maybe those concerns are more legitimate than the establishment wants to admit. This is the nightmare scenario for any government that relies on controlling acceptable discourse. Once the dam breaks, once respected voices start saying what was previously unsayable, the whole structure of narrative control becomes unstable. The interview has also exposed the deep disconnect between media institutions and the public they supposedly serve. The broadcast network that aired Hardy's Confrontation has been in crisis mode, with executives reportedly furious that such content made it to air. There are questions about how it happened, whether producers should have cut to commercial, whether the interviewer should have shut down the conversation more aggressively. But these questions reveal how thoroughly detached media leadership is from their actual audience. While executives worry about offending the government and maintaining access to official sources, their viewers are celebrating finally seeing someone speak honestly on their screens. The ratings for that interview segment were massive, with streaming numbers continuing to climb as people seek out the full unedited version. The public appetite for honest discussion of what's happening in Britain is enormous, but media institutions have been so captured by establishment thinking that they can't or won't provide it. Hardy's unplanned moment of truth-telling has demonstrated the massive gap between what people want to hear and what they're normally allowed to hear from mainstream platforms. The implications for Starmer personally are devastating. It's one thing to face criticism from political opponents or partisan media outlets. That's expected and can be dismissed as political theatre. But when someone like Tom Hardy, unprompted and unscripted, expresses such visceral disgust with your leadership, it signals something deeper. It suggests that you've lost the benefit of the doubt that ordinary people who don't follow politics obsessively have nonetheless formed strong negative opinions about your character and governance. Starmer's entire political brand was built on being the responsible adult, the competent administrator who would restore stability and trust after years of conservative chaos. Hardy's Confrontation shattered that image in a few minutes of live television. The specific accusations, the personal nature of the attack, the moral dimension of calling out tyranny rather than just disagreeing with policy, all of it damages Starmer in ways that are difficult to repair. You can't simply dismiss being called a tyrant as political disagreement. That's a fundamental character judgment that sticks in public consciousness. What's driving all of this beneath the surface is a growing sense that Britain is at a genuine crossroads. The policies being implemented, the crackdowns on dissent, the criminalisation of normal political speech, these aren't random or disconnected events. They're part of a broader transformation of British society towards something that looks less like a liberal democracy and more like a soft authoritarian state. People feel this intuitively, even if they can't always articulate it precisely. They sense that fundamental things about British life and liberty are changing in permanent ways. Hardy's willingness to name this reality, to use words like tyranny without hedging or qualifying, validates these inchoate fears and gives them shape. This is why the establishment response has been so panicked. They need people to believe that everything is normal, that concerns about freedom and democracy are overblown, that critics are extremists or conspiracy theorists. Hardy's intervention makes that narrative impossible to maintain because he's saying what millions already believe but have been told they're wrong to think. The confrontation has also crystallised the class dimensions of current British politics in ways that make the Labour government deeply uncomfortable. Starmer's Labour was supposed to represent working people against privileged elites, but Hardy's attack came from an explicitly working class perspective. He spoke about visiting his hometown, about the people he grew up with who feel betrayed and abandoned. He positioned himself as speaking for ordinary Britons against a political class that's lost touch with their concerns and values. This is politically devastating for Labour because it flips the usual script. Instead of progressive politicians speaking for the working class against conservative elites, we have a working class voice attacking progressive politicians as the new elite, as the ones who've betrayed the people they claim to represent. Hardy made clear that the divide isn't between left and right anymore, but between a political class of all parties and stripes versus ordinary people who just want to live their lives without being controlled, taxed into poverty or arrested for their opinions. This framing is deeply threatening to the established political order because it suggests that the entire system is the problem, not just one party or faction within it. The wider cultural impact of Hardy's televised assault on Starmer extends far beyond the immediate political moment. Britain has been experiencing a crisis of trust in institutions for years now, with faith in government, media and traditional authority figures declining steadily. But there's been a parallel crisis of courage, a sense that even people with platforms who could speak out choose not to because the personal costs are too high. Hardy's willingness to risk his reputation and potentially his career by launching such a direct attack breaks through that paralysis. It demonstrates that it's possible to speak truth to power without being destroyed in the process. Or at least that some things are worth the risk of being destroyed over. This example matters more than any particular policy argument because it's about recovering a culture of honest discourse in public life. British culture has always valued a certain kind of plain speaking, a willingness to call out nonsense regardless of who's spouting it. That quality has been suppressed in recent years by social pressure, professional consequences and legal threats. Hardy is modelling its return, showing that you can be successful, respected and still willing to say what needs to be said. The reaction from other celebrities has been fascinating to watch. Many have stayed conspicuously silent, clearly calculating the risks of either supporting or condemning Hardy's outburst. But some have begun tentatively expressing support, often in carefully worded statements that show they agree with the substance while maintaining deniability about the delivery. This is how cultural shifts begin, with one person breaking the seal and others gradually realising they can too. The entertainment industry has been particularly captured by progressive orthodoxy, with careers regularly destroyed for expressing heterodox views on politics or culture. But Hardy's status as an A-list actor, who's spoken his mind without immediate professional destruction, may open space for others to be more honest. We may be witnessing the beginning of a broader cultural correction, where public figures feel less constrained by ideological conformity. If that happens, it will represent a seismic shift in British public discourse because so much of the current climate depends on famous voices either supporting or remaining silent about government overreach. Once those voices start breaking ranks, the whole structure becomes unstable. What Hardy articulated about the farmer situation specifically has resonated because it connects to deeper anxieties about Britain's future. The destruction of family farms isn't just an agricultural policy question. It represents the severing of connections to land, heritage and continuity that have defined British life for centuries. Urban Britons who've never farmed still understand at some level that something precious is being destroyed. Hardy spoke about visiting farming communities and hearing the desperation, but he also connected it to bigger questions about what kind of country Britain wants to be. Does it want to be a place where family enterprises spanning generations can survive? Does it want food security and connection to rural life? Or does it want to become entirely dependent on corporate agriculture and foreign imports while its countryside is carved up for development? These aren't abstract questions. They're about identity, about what makes Britain recognisably British. Hardy framed the attack on farmers as an attack on Britain itself, and that framing has struck a chord with people far beyond agricultural communities. The free speech dimension of Hardy's criticism carries even more weight because it touches on fundamental liberties that Britons have long taken for granted. The idea that you could be arrested for a social media post, investigated for attending a protest, or professionally destroyed for expressing unpopular views would have seemed absurd just a few years ago. Now it's routine, normalised to the point where many have stopped noticing how extraordinary it is.